Every animal on Earth fears something. Even the great white shark, the predator that has ruled the ocean for millions of years, has one. And the moment it shows up, the shark does something nobody expected. It runs. A great white, up to 20 feet long and 4,000 pounds of pure muscle, turns and flees the second a killer whale comes within 2 miles. We are going to find out why. We will cover the surgical attack that leaves giant carcasses with single precise wounds, the biological glitch orcas exploit to paralyze a shark mid-ocean, and the nursery raids that could change shark populations forever. If you enjoy this, subscribe and drop a like. Now, we begin. Picture the biggest dog you have ever seen. Now picture a horse standing next to it. That is roughly the size difference between a great white shark and a killer whale. Most people think these two are equals. They picture a fair fight, 2 massive predators circling each other in dark water. The reality is completely one-sided. A fully grown great white shark reaches about 20 feet long. That is roughly the length of a school bus cut in half. It can weigh up to 4,000 pounds. For most creatures on Earth, those numbers make the great white the most dangerous thing in the water. For an orca, those numbers describe a meal. A killer whale stretches up to 26 feet long and can weigh 12,000 pounds. That is 3 full great white sharks stacked on a scale. The orca is longer, heavier, faster, and smarter. Every single physical advantage belongs to the whale. Size alone does not determine who wins in the ocean, but size combined with speed, intelligence, and teamwork does. Orcas swim at up to 35 miles per hour in short bursts. Great whites top out well below that. When the two meet in open water, the shark has no speed advantage to fall back on. Here is the part that surprises most people. The great white shark has been on Earth for millions of years. It survived mass extinctions, ice ages, and the complete reshaping of the oceans multiple times. Its design is close to perfect for what it does. And yet, every time a killer whale shows up, that millions of years old survival machine makes one decision instantly. Leave. Scientists first started noticing this pattern in the late 1990s. Researchers tracking great whites off the California coast observed something strange. Sharks that had been feeding at a specific site for weeks would vanish within minutes of an orcapod arriving. The sharks did not circle. They did not size up the threat. They left at full speed. The size gap explains part of it, but size alone does not explain why a 4,000-pound apex predator feels instant total fear. There is something deeper going on. The great white does not just recognize the orca as bigger. It recognizes the orca as something it cannot process with its usual instincts. A lone shark versus a coordinated group of animals that outweigh it by 3 times and communicate in real time. The shark's entire hunting strategy depends on surprise. It ambushes from below. It strikes fast and retreats. Against a pod of orcas that hunt as a single coordinated unit, that strategy collapses completely. The shark has no backup plan. Think of it like a football player stepping onto a court for the first time against a basketball team. The player is strong, fast, and skilled at what they do. But the game is completely different, and the opponents have been playing together for years. The individual skill means nothing when the system surrounding it is superior. What makes this even more striking is where great whites rank everywhere else in the ocean. Every other creature retreats when a great white arrives. Seals panic. Fish scatter. Even other large sharks give way. The great white operates at the top of an enormous hierarchy, and then one specific animal walks in and flips the entire structure upside down in seconds. The size gap is the first reason. The speed gap is the second. But the third reason is the one that actually decides the outcome before any contact is ever made, and it has nothing to do with muscle. The great white shark does not need a partner. It never has. For millions of years, that independence was the secret to its success. And right now, in the open ocean, it is the single biggest reason an orca can take one apart. Great whites hunt alone. Every part of their body is built around solo ambush. They cruise slowly near the surface or along the seafloor, conserving energy, waiting, when prey appears above them. The shark drives straight up from below at full speed and strikes before the animal even knows it is being watched. The attack lasts less than a second. The shark retreats, waits for the prey to weaken, and returns. Clean, efficient, deadly, that strategy has worked for so long because the shark's prey has never been able to organize a response. Seals do not coordinate. Fish do not form defensive groups. Sea lions scatter the moment a shark appears. For millions of years, the great white never needed to develop a backup plan because nothing it hunted ever required one. Orcas changed that equation completely. An orca pod communicates constantly. The whales use clicks, whistles, and calls that scientists have been studying for decades. Each pod has its own set of sounds, almost like a dialect, that the members use to coordinate movement. When a pod decides to hunt, every whale in the group knows its role before the attack begins. Some whales drive prey toward the surface, others block escape routes, others wait at specific positions to intercept. The entire pod functions like a single organism with a shared brain. Against a lone shark, this coordination is overwhelming. The great white has no way to call for backup, no signal to send, no pod to alert. It is built for a world where individual power is enough. In a world where a group of animals weighing 12,000 pounds each moves with military precision, individual power runs out fast. Scientists who study predator behavior point to something called the isolation effect. A predator hunting alone is most effective when it can control the environment, dictate the timing, and choose the angle of attack. Strip away those advantages and the predator loses almost everything that makes it dangerous. Orcas strip away every single one. The great white cannot choose the angle because the orcas approach from multiple directions at once. It cannot control the timing because the pod moves faster than it can react. It cannot dictate the terms of the encounter because the orcas already decided those terms before the shark even detected them. Here is something worth picturing. A great white is essentially a torpedo with teeth. Everything about its shape is designed for a single powerful forward strike. It does not maneuver well at slow speeds, it cannot reverse, it cannot hold position easily. In a direct confrontation with an animal that can change direction instantly and weighs 3 times as much, the torpedo design becomes a disadvantage. Orcas, by contrast, are built for complex movement. Their tail flukes push them forward and backward. Their pectoral fins allow sharp turns. They can spin, dive, and surface in tight combinations that a shark physically cannot match. The great white's solo hunting style worked perfectly for millions of years. Against every other threat in the ocean, it still does. But the orca did not just bring a size advantage to this fight. It brought a completely different model of intelligence. And the shark has no answer for it. What happens in the seconds after that intelligence gets organized toward one specific shark is something scientists only started capturing on film recently. The footage is hard to watch. October 14th, 1997. A whale-watching boat sat about a mile off southeast Farallon Island, near San Francisco. The passengers were watching a pair of killer whales moving through the water. Then one of them turned sharply toward a juvenile male great white shark feeding on a sea elephant carcass nearby. What happened next took less than 15 minutes and changed marine biology permanently. The female orca accelerated, rammed the shark from below, and drove it to the surface. The shark thrashed. The orca flipped it over. And then the shark went completely still. The whale held the shark upside down at the surface for an extended period. When it was done, researchers watching from the boat saw the orca feed. The rest of the shark's body drifted away intact. Scientists on the boat were stunned. Orcas were known to eat many things: seals, fish, squid, even other whales. But a great white shark had never been directly observed as prey before that day. The event launched years of research that nobody had previously thought necessary. Peter Pyle, a biologist stationed on the Farallon Islands at the time, later described watching the behaviour with complete disbelief. His team had been monitoring great white shark activity at the islands for years. They knew each shark individually by the shape of its dorsal fin. After the attack, something strange happened. Every tagged great white in the area vanished from their sensors within hours. Gone. All of them. The orcas had stayed near the island for less than a day, but the sharks did not come back for the rest of the season. That disappearance was the first recorded data point for what scientists now call the landscape of fear effect. The idea is simple. Prey animals do not just flee from predators in the moment of attack. They change their entire use of a habitat based on where they believe the threat could appear again. The Farallon sharks did not return because the entire island felt dangerous, even after the orcas left. The 1997 event was recorded on video by passengers on the whale-watching boat. That footage circulated among researchers and triggered a wave of questions. How often did this happen? Had it always been happening without anyone noticing? Were there more attacks in places without researchers watching? The answers came slowly. More sightings began to surface. Fishermen reported strange behaviour. Tagged sharks started showing movement patterns that only made sense if something was chasing them. The picture that assembled over the following decade was far bigger than anyone expected from a single 15-minute event off the California coast. The event at the Farallon Islands was recorded. It was witnessed. Scientists confirmed the kill, confirmed the feeding behaviour, and confirmed the evacuation that followed. Every piece of that event has since been replicated in other locations around the world. But the 1997 attack raised one question that took years to answer properly. If orcas had the size, speed, and coordination to take down a great white, why did they bother? The shark is dangerous and difficult to catch. There are easier meals in every direction. So why target the most dangerous fish on the planet? The answer turns out to be about one specific thing inside the shark's body, and once scientists identified it, the entire predator relationship snapped into focus. The shark does not wait to confirm what it smells, it runs first. Scientists tracking great whites with electronic tags off the California coast noticed something that did not make immediate sense. Sharks were abandoning feeding sites before any orca was visually observed nearby. The flight response was triggering at a distance. The sharks were reacting to something they detected from far away, sometimes from up to 2 miles out. 2 miles of open ocean. The shark sensed the threat, processed it, and was already swimming away before a human on a boat could spot the incoming pod with binoculars. The question this raised for researchers was direct. What exactly are the sharks detecting? There are two leading ideas, and both are grounded in what we know about shark biology. The first idea involves the shark's sense of smell. Great whites possess one of the most powerful noses of any animal on Earth. The part of a shark's brain dedicated to processing scent is enormous relative to its body size. Sharks can detect a single drop of blood in a volume of water the size of a large swimming pool. Their nostrils are designed to sample water constantly, pulling it in, reading its chemical contents, and passing the information to the brain almost instantly. Orcas produce chemical signals as they move through the water. They shed skin cells, release waste, and leave a chemical trail behind them that changes the composition of the water they pass through. Some researchers believe sharks may be detecting those specific orca chemicals from a significant distance, reading them the same way they would read a blood trail, and recognizing the signal as danger before any visual confirmation is possible. The second idea is sound. Orcas are some of the loudest animals on Earth. They use echolocation, a system where they produce clicking sounds and listen to the echoes bouncing back off objects around them. Each pod has its own acoustic pattern, almost like a fingerprint. Sharks have a sensory system called the lateral line that runs along their entire body and picks up pressure changes and vibrations moving through the water. Some researchers believe sharks can detect the specific acoustic signature of an orca pod from a substantial distance, and that their nervous system registers it as an immediate threat signal. Both ideas are supported by evidence, and both may be true at the same time. The shark may be reading chemical signals with its nose and pressure signals through its lateral lines simultaneously, combining those two streams of information into a single alarm that triggers the escape response. What is striking is how fast that response happens. Tagged sharks in documented studies did not circle or hesitate. The departure was immediate and directional. The sharks swam away from the detected source as fast as they could sustain, putting as much distance between themselves and the signal as possible. For an animal with no speed advantage over the threat it is fleeing, that head start matters enormously. 2 miles of warning buys enough time to clear the feeding area before the pod arrives. Losing that lead, even briefly, could make escape impossible. The detection system the shark relies on may be millions of years old. But the question scientists are still working through is whether that system evolved specifically in response to Orcas, or whether it is a general alarm system that the shark simply learned to associate with this one particular threat. The answer to that question changes everything we think we know about how long these two animals have been locked in this dynamic. And there is one more detail about the escape that makes the flight response even stranger. The direction the sharks choose to flee in is almost always the same. Straight down. An orca pod does not always wait for a shark to run. Sometimes it chases. Researchers have recorded instances where killer whales actively pursued great white sharks across open water. The speed data from those events is striking. Orcas sustain speeds of up to 25 miles per hour during a chase and can hit 35 miles per hour in short bursts. Great whites in the same conditions top out significantly below those numbers. The gap is wide enough that in a straight chase across open water, the shark has almost no chance of outrunning the pod. 25 miles per hour in the ocean does not sound dramatic until you try to picture what that looks like. An animal the size of a school bus, moving faster than most people drive through a neighbourhood, turning and adjusting course in real time while coordinating with several other animals doing the same thing. The shark ahead of it is running at full effort and still falling behind. The chase is only one part of the strategy. Orca pods do not always pursue in a straight line. Some whales in the pod move ahead of the shark, cutting off escape routes before the shark reaches them. Others push from behind. The formation functions like a net that tightens as it moves. The shark runs into closing walls of animal no matter which direction it tries to adjust. Scientists studying orca hunting behaviour describe this as cooperative encirclement. The pod does not just chase the target, it manages the space around the target, reducing the shark's options one by one until the only available direction is the one the orcas have chosen. For the shark, this is the worst possible situation. Its entire survival strategy depends on controlling space and picking its moment. In cooperative encirclement, the shark controls nothing. The orcas decide when the chase ends. Here is a comparison that makes the speed gap vivid. Imagine running a race where the person behind you is always faster, and every time you try to turn left, someone is already there. Every time you angle right, another runner cuts that path off. You are spending full energy just to run into a smaller and smaller space. That is what the shark experiences in a coordinated orca chase. There is an important detail about energy in this. Great whites are cold-blooded, meaning they rely on the water temperature around them to regulate their body heat. Orcas are warm-blooded mammals. They generate their own heat internally and sustain high output activity longer than the shark can. During a prolonged chase, the energy balance shifts further against the shark as time passes. The longer the pursuit runs, the more it favours the pod. Documented chases captured on video show the shark attempting direction changes multiple times before the encirclement closes. Each change is met with an orca already in that space. The final moments of a successful chase typically involve one orca making contact while the others hold position around the shark, preventing any escape vector from reopening. The speed chase is the rarest version of the encounter. Most of the time, the shark detects the pod early enough to avoid it. But when the detection fails and the chase begins, the outcome follows a predictable pattern. And what the orcas do in the final seconds of that chase involves something that turns the shark's own biology against it. Before the orca makes contact, the hunt is already half over. Orca pods do not improvise. Researchers who have studied killer whale behaviour for decades describe their hunting sequences as structured, repeatable, and taught. Each pod develops specific techniques that its members practice together and refine over time. When a pod identifies a great white shark as a target, what follows is a coordinated sequence that the whales have run before. The pod spreads out into a loose formation around the shark. Some animals position ahead of the target, some to the sides, some behind. The spacing is deliberate. Each whale in the formation covers a zone, ensuring the shark has no gap to accelerate through. The spacing adjusts as the shark moves, the pod reshaping itself like a fluid net. Communication runs the entire time. Orcas produce clicks, pulsed calls, and whistles during hunts. Researchers who have recorded these acoustic sequences note that the patterns change as the hunt progresses, with different calls corresponding to different phases of the attack. The whales are not just moving together, they are talking through the hunt in real time. At some point in the sequence, the pod shifts from containment to contact. One or two orcas make the approach while the others hold their positions. The approaching whales aim for specific targets, the shark's body orientation, its speed, its defensive responses, and they adjust their angle accordingly. The remaining pod members stay in formation, closing off any direction the shark might use to escape the initial contact. This level of coordination requires something that no fish on Earth possesses. It requires memory, communication, and the ability to hold a shared plan across multiple individuals simultaneously. Scientists categorize this as complex social cognition. Humans have it. Orcas have it. Great white sharks do not have anything close to it. The difference in brain size between an orca and a great white is extreme. An orca brain weighs around 12 pounds, making it one of the largest brains of any animal on Earth relative to body size. The great white brain weighs only a few ounces. The processing difference between those two structures is enormous. A shark reads its immediate environment and reacts. An orca plans, communicates, adjusts, and teaches. In any encounter where pure reaction faces an organized plan, the plan wins. Here is something that makes the coordination even more impressive. Orca pods consist of family members. The whales in the hunt are typically a mother, her adult offspring, and her offspring's offspring. These animals have lived together their entire lives. They know each other's movement patterns, speeds, and tendencies. That familiarity makes their coordination faster and more precise than any group of strangers could achieve. The great white shark has spent millions of years perfecting individual predatory skill. The orca has spent that same time developing group predatory intelligence. When those two things meet, the group wins consistently. Individual skill has a ceiling. Group intelligence scales with the number of participants. There is one specific moment in the hunt when the coordination reaches its most precise point. The attack itself requires timing between multiple whales down to fractions of a second, and the target in that final moment is so specific, so deliberate, and so anatomically precise that it took scientists years to understand what the orcas were actually doing. When an orca kills a great white shark, it ignores most of the body. The shark can weigh 4,000 pounds. It carries hundreds of pounds of muscle, cartilage, skin, and organ tissue. An orca pod capable of hunting and killing such an animal could theoretically feed on most of it. Instead, the whales locate a specific spot on the shark's underside, make a targeted wound, and remove a single organ. Then they leave the rest. The organ is the liver. A great white shark's liver is unlike any organ in a land animal. It fills most of the shark's body cavity, running the full length of the torso. In a large adult shark, the liver can weigh up to 600 pounds on its own, which is more than the entire body weight of most adult humans. The liver in a shark is not just a filtering organ the way it functions in mammals, it is the shark's primary buoyancy system, a massive fuel reserve, and the densest concentration of calories in the animal's body. Shark liver is rich in a compound called squalene, a type of oil that is lighter than water and keeps the shark neutrally buoyant without needing a swim bladder like bony fish have. Beyond buoyancy, that oil is packed with energy. Pound for pound, shark liver oil carries far more usable energy than muscle tissue. For a hunting orca living in cold ocean water and burning enormous amounts of energy to stay warm, that caloric density makes the liver the single most valuable food source on the shark's body. So Orcas evolved a targeting system around it. When a pod finishes immobilizing a shark, the whales locate the liver's position inside the body and extract it with what researchers describe as surgical accuracy. Scientists examining carcasses that washed ashore found a consistent wound pattern, a single precise opening on the underside of the shark near the pectoral fins, with the liver gone and the surrounding tissue largely intact. The extraction method itself is striking. Orcas have been observed squeezing the shark's body, starting near the tail and working toward the head, forcing the liver toward the opening the way you would squeeze a tube of toothpaste from the bottom. The liver comes out whole. The orcas consume it immediately. The rest of the carcass, still largely intact, sinks or drifts away. This targeting behavior requires the orca to understand something about the shark's internal anatomy. The whale must know where the liver sits, how to create the right opening, and how to apply pressure to extract the organ cleanly. That knowledge is not instinct. It is learned behavior, passed through pods from older whales to younger ones. In 2017, 5 great white shark carcasses washed onto beaches along the South African coast over a short period. Each one showed the same pattern. Large body, otherwise intact. Single wound near the pectoral fins. Liver absent. The precision of the wounds was consistent enough that researchers immediately identified the killer. 2 specific orcas, known to scientists by the names Port and Starboard, had been working that coastline. Port and Starboard had developed their own technique, and they had been using it repeatedly, efficiently, and across a very large stretch of ocean. But the liver extraction is only possible because of something the orcas figured out about the shark's biology first, something that makes the whole process far safer for the whales than it sounds. The bodies told the story before anyone saw the kill live. When researchers laid out the 5 South African carcasses side by side and began examining the wounds, the pattern was exact. Each shark had a single opening directly beneath the pectoral fins, the large wing-like fins that run along a shark's sides. The surrounding tissue showed minimal damage. The livers were gone completely. No other organs were disturbed. To remove an organ that large through a single opening without tearing the surrounding body requires applying pressure from the outside and guiding the organ toward the exit point. That is exactly what orca behavior suggests they do. Witnesses to partial attacks described orcas pressing along the shark's body from behind the wound toward the front, compressing the body cavity and forcing the liver toward the opening. One marine biologist who examined the carcasses described the technique as nearly identical to squeezing the last of the toothpaste out of a tube. You do not open the tube wide and reach in. You seal everything behind the target and push forward. The liver emerges from the single wound point, and the orcas take it directly from the water. For the orcas, this method is efficient in a way that matters. The shark's jaws remain the most dangerous part of its body, even in a weakened state. A bite from a great white can exert enormous pressure and cause catastrophic injury to a whale. By not dismantling the body broadly, the orcas minimize contact with the dangerous end of the shark. The liver extraction keeps the pod well away from the teeth, while still capturing the highest value food source on the animal. The process requires at least 2 orcas working together. One holds the shark stable or maintains position along one side of the body. The other applies the compression. A third may monitor the shark's movement and alert the group if anything changes. The whole sequence, from initial contact to liver removal, can be remarkably fast once the shark has been immobilized. The immobilization part is the step that makes the extraction possible in the first place. Without it, a 4,000-pound shark would be thrashing constantly, making any precise targeting of the liver impossible. So before the extraction begins, the orcas need the shark completely still. And they figured out exactly how to achieve that. What makes this behaviour particularly significant to scientists is that it demonstrates tool-level problem-solving in animal behaviour. The orca is not just catching prey. It is identifying the most calorie-dense part of the prey, developing a specific physical technique to access that part safely, and executing that technique with enough consistency that it produces identical wound patterns across different attacks in different locations. That level of specificity is rare outside of humans and a small number of other large-brained animals. 5 carcasses on a South African beach were striking, but they raised an immediate question for the researchers photographing the wounds. If the orcas were consistently extracting livers, they needed the shark to stay perfectly still during the process. A thrashing 4,000-pound predator with rows of serrated teeth does not stay still on its own. Something had to be stopping it. The answer was already inside the shark's own nervous system. The orcas had found it. And once they started using it, the balance of power between the two animals shifted in a way the shark had no biological response to. The shark has a built-in off switch. Orcas figured out where it is. Tonic immobility is a natural reflex found in many animal species. In the great white shark, the reflex triggers when the animal is turned completely upside down. The moment the shark is inverted, a change runs through its nervous system, and the animal enters a state of complete muscular paralysis. It cannot move, it cannot bite, it floats motionless, breathing slowed, all defensive capability gone. Scientists have known about this reflex for decades. Marine biologists who study sharks sometimes use it deliberately during research, gently flipping a captured shark to keep it calm and still during tagging or measurement. In that context, tonic immobility is a tool humans use on sharks. The remarkable thing is that orcas reached the same discovery entirely on their own. The reflex lasts as long as the shark stays inverted. The moment the animal is righted, the reflex breaks and the shark recovers quickly. So the orca's job after triggering immobility is to keep the shark in that position for as long as the extraction requires. A single orca can maintain pressure on a paralyzed shark at the surface, holding it upside down while the rest of the pod moves in. How orcas discovered this reflex is unknown. The most likely explanation is that it happened by accident during an early attack. An orca ramming a shark from below at high speed could flip the animal over as an unintended result. A flipped shark that suddenly goes limp is an obviously easier target than a thrashing one. Once that connection formed in the orca's mind, deliberate inversion became a hunting strategy. The fact that this behaviour is now consistent across different pods in different oceans suggests that it has been taught and spread. Orcas observed near South Africa use it. Orcas near California use it. Orcas near New Zealand have been associated with shark attacks showing the same behavioural signatures. A technique discovered by accident in one pod has moved through orca culture across thousands of miles of ocean. This is where the biological gap between the two animals becomes clearest. The shark's tonic immobility reflex exists, in the scientific community's best current understanding, as a predator avoidance mechanism. Some researchers believe the reflex evolved to help sharks play dead when confronted by a larger threat, buying time for the threat to lose interest. The reflex may have worked for millions of years against every threat the shark encountered, until the threat learned to hold the shark upside down on purpose. The great white cannot choose to override the reflex. Once inverted, the paralysis is automatic. The shark's own nervous system becomes the orca's most effective restraint tool. No physical struggle is required from the orca's side, no dangerous grappling near the shark's jaws. The shark does the orca's job for it. From the outside, the scene looks almost peaceful. An enormous shark floating motionless at the surface, an orca positioned alongside it, the rest of the pod holding formation nearby. The stillness is complete. And then the extraction begins. But triggering tonic immobility requires something specific. The orca must flip a 20-foot, 4,000-pound animal upside down in the open ocean. That is an athletic feat that raises its own set of questions. How exactly do orcas manage it? And is it the same every time? Flipping a great white shark is a physics problem. Orcas solved it. A great white shark in the water is not easy to rotate. Its body is dense, its pectoral fins create resistance, and its muscle mass distributes its weight in a way that keeps it naturally oriented with its belly down. To flip it, you need to apply force at the right angle, at the right point on the body, and with enough speed to overcome the shark's own corrective muscle responses. Orcas do this with a ram. The whale approaches from below or from the side at high speed and strikes the shark near its midsection or toward the head with its rostrum, the hard bony front of the snout. The impact transfers enormous force into the shark's body at a point that creates rotational movement. If the angle is right, the shark rolls. If it rolls past the midpoint, it goes fully inverted, and the tonic immobility reflex locks in. The targeting matters enormously. A strike too far back on the shark's body produces a spin that does not reach full inversion. A strike too far forward may injure the shark in ways that complicate the extraction that follows. Orcas appear to target a zone roughly behind the pectoral fins that produces the most reliable full rotation with the least wasted energy. Multiple orcas can be involved in the flipping attempt, particularly with a large adult shark that resists rotation on the first strike. Witnesses to the Neptune Islands attack in 2015 described an orca keeping a large great white pinned at the surface for an extended period. Getting the shark there initially required coordinated effort from more than one whale. Here is a way to picture the scale of this. Imagine trying to flip a compact car in a swimming pool using only your body as a battering ram. The car is moving, resisting, and fighting to stay upright. You have to hit it at exactly the right spot and angle in a single pass. Now imagine you do this regularly enough that you have a preferred technique. That is roughly what the orca is doing. The speed of the ram matters as much as the angle. Slow contact does not generate enough rotational force. The orca needs to be at high speed at the moment of impact. That means the approach has to be calculated in advance, with the orca reading the shark's movement and projecting where it will be when the strike lands, the same way a quarterback throws to where the receiver will be rather than where they are now. This level of spatial prediction requires brain processing that scientists categorize as future state modeling. The orca is running a mental simulation of a moving object's path and calculating an intercept point. That is cognitively sophisticated in a way that places orcas in a small group of animals capable of true predictive planning. Once the flip is successful and the shark enters tonic immobility, the pod has a limited window to complete the extraction before the shark needs to be righted or repositioned. The orcas work efficiently within that window. The entire sequence, from ram to liver extraction, has been observed completing in a matter of minutes. The mechanics of the flip are impressive on their own, but the most striking thing about this behaviour is what it represents. An orca figured out that a specific animal has a specific vulnerability, then developed a specific physical technique to exploit it. That is problem solving at a level that changes how scientists think about animal intelligence in the ocean. What happens after the extraction raises a different question entirely. The shark, now missing its primary caloric store, the organ that keeps it buoyant and fueled, is left to drift. But that is not the most significant consequence of the attack. The most significant consequence happens over the next 12 months, and it reshapes an entire stretch of coastline. 1 hour of orcas. 12 months of empty water. Scientists tracking great white sharks along the California coast documented one of the most striking behavioural responses ever recorded in a large predator. After a single orca pod spent less than 1 hour at a known shark feeding site, every tagged great white in the area left and stayed gone for an entire year. They did not return to test the waters. They did not come back after a week to see if the threat had passed. They were absent for 12 full months. This response has a name in ecology. Researchers call it the landscape of fear. The idea is that prey animals do not just react to predators in the moment. They build a mental map of where danger has appeared and restructure their entire behaviour around avoiding those spaces, even when the predator is long gone. Most documented examples of this effect involve small prey animals responding to medium-sized predators. The Farallon Islands data showed it operating at the top of the food chain, with the ocean's most famous apex predator responding to a single brief encounter with the intensity of a much smaller animal. The departure itself was fast. Electronic tags on the sharks showed movement away from the site beginning within minutes of the orca pod's arrival. By the time the orcas left, the sharks were already miles away. The tags continued broadcasting for the following months, and the data showed the sharks occupying entirely different areas of the Pacific, far from their usual hunting grounds. For the sharks, the logic of this response makes sense at a survival level. The risk calculation for staying is extreme. A great white shark that lingers near an orca pod runs the risk of the encounter scientists documented at the Farallon Islands in 1997. The risk of leaving is comparatively low. The shark gives up a feeding site, but feeding sites exist elsewhere. The shark does not give up its life. What makes the 12-month duration striking is the extreme version of the response. Most predator avoidance behavior in animal ecology involves relatively short avoidance periods. The prey tests the environment, confirms the threat is gone, and returns. Great whites essentially skip that testing phase entirely. One confirmed orca presence translates into a full year of absence. Researchers noted something else in the tag data. When the sharks eventually returned to the area after the year-long absence, their movement patterns showed increased caution. They approached the familiar feeding sites differently, spending more time in deeper water nearby before committing to the shallower zones where they normally hunted. The encounter had changed their behavior even after they came back. Each great white that abandons a feeding site leaves behind whatever prey concentration drew it there in the first place. Elephant seals, sea lions, and fish populations at the site continue growing without a top predator present. By the time the shark returns a year later, the site may look completely different ecologically. The shark's year-long absence sets off a chain reaction that runs through the entire local food web. That chain reaction has consequences that extend far beyond the shark and the orca. Coastal communities, wildlife populations, and entire local ecosystems shift when a great white evacuates its territory for a year. The scale of that shift, and who benefits most from it, turns out to be surprisingly specific. When the sharks leave, the seals throw a party. That is a simplified version of what researchers observed along the California coast during shark evacuation events. When great white sharks abandon their feeding grounds after orca encounters, the prey populations those sharks normally controlled begin to grow without any check on their numbers. The most dramatic example involves elephant seals. Elephant seals are a primary food source for great white sharks along the northern California coast. Adult male elephant seals can reach 3,000 pounds, but juveniles and females are well within the great white's hunting range. During normal conditions, shark predation keeps the local elephant seal population in a steady state. When sharks evacuate, that pressure disappears. Scientists monitoring seal populations at affected sites observed the result in clear numbers. During periods when sharks abandoned their feeding grounds following orca encounters, predation on elephant seals dropped by 4 to 7 times compared to normal seasons. 4 to 7 times fewer elephant seals were being killed during the weeks and months when the sharks were absent. For the elephant seals, this reads as a sudden abundance of safety. More seals survived. More juveniles reached adulthood. The colony at the affected site grew larger and more visible. The seals' behaviour changed too. Animals that normally stayed alert and moved cautiously through the water began to spend more time near the surface in open water, behaviours they would typically avoid in areas with active great white presence. This kind of cascading effect through a food chain is what ecologists call a trophic cascade. Remove the top predator and the effects ripple downward through every layer of the ecosystem below it. The shark eats the seal. Take away the shark, and the seal population booms. Seal populations eat fish. A booming seal population puts pressure on fish populations below it. The fish eat smaller organisms. the pressure spreads. At southeast Farallon Island, researchers compared seasons with active shark presence to seasons following orca-triggered evacuations. The difference in seal behaviour and population dynamics was measurable and consistent. The island essentially transformed into a different ecological environment depending on whether the sharks were present. The elephant seals themselves seem to have no awareness of why conditions have suddenly improved. They are not responding to the shark's absence consciously. They are simply living in an environment that has temporarily stopped killing them at its usual rate. The behavioural shift toward more open water activity suggests their stress responses dropped in parallel with the actual predation rate. For marine biologists, this kind of natural experiment is valuable precisely because it was not designed. Nobody removed the sharks on purpose. The orcas did it, and researchers could observe the downstream consequences in real time with their existing monitoring equipment. The Farallon Islands data became one of the clearest real-world demonstrations of apex predator effects on ecosystem structure ever recorded. The cascade runs in both directions. When sharks return after the evacuation year ends, seal populations that grew unchecked suddenly face renewed predation pressure. The transition back can be abrupt. Seal mortality spikes. Fish populations rebound as seal numbers drop back down. The food chain resets. What this cycle reveals is how much of the ocean's stability depends on the shark being exactly where it normally is. One orcapod spending 1 hour at one location triggers a chain of effects that takes more than a year to fully reverse, and that was from a single encounter at a single site. The site where this was first documented in detail sits just 27 miles off the coast of San Francisco. And what happened there over multiple seasons gave researchers a case study unlike anything else in marine ecology. 27 miles off San Francisco, the ocean runs on a different set of rules. Southeast Farallon Island is a small, rocky outcropping in the Pacific, mostly known for its enormous colonies of seabirds and marine mammals. For great white sharks, it is something else entirely, one of the richest hunting grounds on the California coast, a place where shark activity concentrates so reliably that researchers have been monitoring it continuously for decades. Which is why, when the sharks started vanishing repeatedly after orca visits, the Farallon Islands became ground zero for understanding the entire dynamic between the two predators. The island is small enough that researchers stationed there can observe a significant portion of the surrounding water. They know the sharks by their dorsal fins. They track them with electronic tags. They record feeding events, arrival patterns, and departure patterns over years. When an orcapod shows up and the sharks leave, the researchers see it in real time, and then watch the data over the months that follow. Multiple evacuation events have been documented at the Farallon Islands across different years. The pattern repeats with enough consistency that researchers can now predict the outcome of an orca visit before the sharks even begin their departure. Orcas arrive. Within minutes, tagged sharks begin moving away from the island. Within hours, the surrounding water is empty of great whites. The orcas leave. The sharks stay gone. What makes the Farallon data particularly compelling is the duration of the monitoring. Because researchers have been tracking this site for so long, they can compare seasons and identify changes that would be invisible in shorter studies. The data shows not just that sharks leave after orca encounters, but that the frequency and timing of orca visits correlates directly with multi-season shifts in shark behaviour at the site. Years with more frequent orca appearances near the Farallon Islands show longer shark absence periods and more dramatic changes in seal and sea lion populations. Years with fewer orca sightings show sharks returning faster and maintaining more of their normal hunting patterns. The orca's influence on the island's ecology is not a one-time event. It is a recurring pressure that reshapes the site every time it appears. The Farallon researchers also documented something subtle in the returning sharks. Animals that had been absent for a full year after an orca encounter showed increased deep water dwelling during their return approach. They would stay in water hundreds of feet deep while exploring the area before committing to the shallower coastal zones where the seals concentrate. The the sharks were being cautious in a way that went beyond immediate threat response. The memory of the encounter was still shaping their decisions a year later. For scientists, the Farallon Islands data represents something rare, a long-term, multi-year, well-documented case study in how apex predator competition reshapes an entire local ecosystem. Most ecology research works from shorter time windows. The Farallon data spans decades and captures repeated cycles of the same pattern playing out in the same location. The island showed researchers what a single orca pod can do to an established predator ecosystem over time. But elsewhere in the world, a much more dramatic piece of evidence was assembling on a beach. 5 carcasses, 5 identical wounds, and 0 witnesses to any of the kills. On a morning in 2017, a beach on the Western Cape coast of South Africa held a scene that marine researchers had never encountered before. 5 great white shark carcasses had washed ashore within a short period. Each one was a large adult animal. Each one was otherwise intact, with its full body present, its fins attached, its skin undamaged apart from a single area. And each one had the same wound, a precise opening on the underside, just behind the pectoral fins, where the liver had been. The livers were gone. Everything else remained. Researchers who examined the carcasses documented the wound characteristics in detail. The openings were consistent in location across all 5 sharks. The surrounding tissue showed pressure damage rather than the tearing or gouging that would result from most feeding interactions. The livers had been extracted cleanly, with no evidence of the surrounding organs being disturbed. The wounds were identical in a way that suggested a single technique applied repeatedly by the same attacker. Local scientists already knew the 2 orcas responsible. Port and Starboard were a pair of male killer whales known to researchers along the South African coast for years. The pair had been observed together frequently and were recognizable by distinctive features of their dorsal fins. Port's fin had collapsed to the right, and Starboard's had collapsed to the left. They were an unusual partnership, 2 males operating without a pod, which is itself rare for orcas. What Port and Starboard appeared to have developed was a specialized hunting technique focused entirely on great white sharks and executed with consistent precision. Their attacks did not resemble the coordinated pod hunts documented in California. These were 2 animals working together in a targeted, repeatable sequence. Approach the shark. Immobilize it. Extract the liver. Leave. The scale of the impact on the South African coast was measurable. In the weeks following the period when the carcasses appeared, great white shark sightings along the Western Cape dropped sharply. Cage diving operators, who rely on predictable shark activity for their tours, reported significantly reduced shark presence at sites that had been consistently active for years. The sharks had read the signal and cleared out. Port and Starboard continued operating along the South African coast in the years after 2017. Additional carcasses with matching wound patterns appeared on beaches in the region in subsequent years, suggesting the pair maintained their technique and continued hunting. Researchers tracking their movements noted that their presence in a specific area consistently preceded shark evacuations from that same zone. For scientists, the South African events provided something the California data lacked. The California research showed behavioral responses tracked by electronic tag. The South African carcasses were physical, tangible, and examinable. The wound characteristics could be measured, photographed, and compared across multiple animals to confirm the consistent technique. The 5 carcasses also demonstrated that the liver extraction method worked efficiently enough for 2 orcas operating alone to eliminate multiple large apex predators from a stretch of coastline. Port and Starboard did not have a pod behind them. They had a technique. And the technique was enough. But the South African events, as dramatic as they were, showed only part of what orcas do to great white populations. The attacks on adult sharks alter shark behavior. What scientists observed next targeted something far more vulnerable. And the long-term consequences of that may be far larger than anything documented at the Farallon Islands or along the Western Cape. Before researchers could understand what great white sharks do when orcas appear, they needed a way to follow the sharks without being in the water with them. Electronic tagging changed everything about what marine biologists can learn from apex predators. A tag is attached to the shark's dorsal fin during a brief capture event. Once attached, the tag broadcasts signals that can be detected by underwater receivers placed around key locations, and in some types by satellites when the tag breaks the surface. The shark carries its own location data with it everywhere it goes. Great white shark tagging programs along the California coast began producing data in the 1990s. Researchers identified individual sharks by their dorsal fin shapes and gave them names or numbers. Each tagged animal became a data point that reported its location, depth, and movement patterns over time. The accumulation of that data over years created something that had never existed before: a detailed map of where great white sharks go, how long they stay, and what makes them leave. The tags that proved most useful for studying orca-shark interactions were depth recording tags, sometimes called pop-up archival tags. These devices record not just location, but the precise depth the shark is swimming at over time, down to the second. When a shark makes a sudden dive to hundreds or thousands of feet, the tag records the entire descent profile: how fast it went down, how deep it reached, how long it stayed, and how quickly it came back up. When researchers began cross-referencing shark tag data with records of orca sightings near the Farallon Islands, the correlations were immediate and striking. Every time an orca visit was recorded at the surface, the tag data from nearby sharks showed one of two responses. Either the shark was already gone from the area before the orca arrived, suggesting it had detected the threat before visual confirmation was possible, or the tag recorded a rapid depth change followed by directional movement away from the site. The directional movement was consistent. Sharks did not scatter randomly. They moved away from the direction of the orca sighting, suggesting they had identified the location of the threat and were choosing the opposite heading. That kind of directional response requires sensory information precise enough to localize the threat, not just detect its general presence. The depth data also revealed the shark behavior that researchers found hardest to explain at first: the deep dives. Sharks fleeing orca encounters did not just swim away along the surface. Many of them dove, steeply, rapidly, and far deeper than their typical hunting depths. The depth profiles recorded during these events showed animals hitting depths far beyond their normal operating range, driven down by something the surface data alone would never have revealed. The tag data built the evidence base for everything scientists now know about the orca-shark interaction. Behavioral responses that would have been invisible without this technology became readable and repeatable. Researchers could identify evacuation events as they happened, track individual sharks over the months of absence, and confirm when animals returned to their former ranges. The tags also revealed something about the shark's deep dive response that raised a new set of questions. The depths some sharks reached during orca avoidance events were extreme enough that researchers wanted to know what was actually down there. A shark plunging to nearly 4,000 feet is entering a part of the ocean that most people never think about, and what awaits it in that darkness is stranger than the threat it is fleeing from. The shark knew the orcas were coming before they arrived. The question is how. Electronic tag data from multiple California studies showed great white sharks evacuating feeding sites before any orca was visually spotted nearby. In some events, the shark's departure was already underway when researchers on boats first detected the incoming pod. The detection was happening at a distance. Something in the water was carrying information the shark could read long before any visual or physical contact. The most studied explanation centers on the shark's olfactory system, its sense of smell. Great white sharks possess nasal cavities that occupy a large portion of the front of the skull. Water flows through these cavities constantly as the shark swims, passing over sensory tissue that can identify individual chemical compounds at concentrations so low they would be undetectable to virtually any other known sensing system. Scientists estimate great whites can detect certain compounds at concentrations of 1 part per 10 billion. roughly equivalent to identifying a single drop of a substance dissolved into a volume of water the size of 10 large swimming pools. Orcas leave a chemical trail as they move through the ocean. They shed skin cells, produce biological waste, and release compounds through respiration at the surface. Each of these produces chemical signals that dissolve into the surrounding water and spread in the direction of the current. A shark swimming down water from an approaching orca pod could theoretically intercept these chemical signals well before the pod comes into visual range. Some researchers have proposed a second chemical pathway. When orcas kill a shark, the attack releases blood and organ fluid into the water. Sharks that detect the chemical signature of great white shark blood might interpret it as a predation signal, even without directly witnessing the kill. Under this idea, the fleeing response would be triggered partly by detecting what happened to another shark nearby. The chemical trace of one killed shark serves as a warning to all others within detection range. The two chemical pathways could work together simultaneously. The shark picks up orca-derived compounds at long range and increases its alert level. It then picks up shark blood compounds and interprets the combination as a confirmed threat signal requiring immediate departure. The two streams of information combine into a single behavioral output: go now, go fast, go far. Testing these ideas directly is challenging. Isolating specific chemical compounds, introducing them to wild sharks in controlled conditions, and measuring behavioral responses in the open ocean requires equipment and experimental designs that are difficult to deploy at sea. Researchers have conducted some laboratory experiments with captive sharks, exposing them to compounds associated with orca presence and measuring responses. Early results support the idea that sharks show avoidance behavior in response to orca-derived chemical signals even in the absence of any other threat indicators. The chemical detection story adds a layer to the orca-shark dynamic that makes the orca's impact on shark behavior even harder for the shark to escape. A shark cannot choose to stop smelling. The olfactory system runs continuously. If the chemical signals that precede orca arrival trigger an automatic fear response in the shark's nervous system, then the orca's influence begins before it even enters the shark's territory. The shark starts running before the orca starts chasing. But chemical signals are not the only thing the shark may be reading. There is a second sensory channel that carries a different kind of information about approaching threats, one that travels through the water in a completely different form. And the sensory organ that receives it runs the full length of the shark's body. The shark feels the orcas before it sees them, possibly before it smells them. Running along both sides of a great white shark's body, from the snout all the way to the tail, is a thin line of fluid-filled canals packed with sensory cells. This system is called the lateral line. It detects changes in water pressure and vibration with extreme sensitivity. Anything moving through the water creates pressure waves that radiate outward in every direction. The lateral line reads those waves continuously and feeds the information directly to the shark's brain. A single fish swimming nearby creates a detectable pressure signature. A school of fish creates a different, larger pattern. A large animal moving at high speed through the water creates a very strong and directional signal that the shark can feel from a substantial distance. Orcas are not quiet animals. They are among the loudest biological sound producers in the ocean. Killer whale pods communicate using whistles, pulsed calls, and burst pulse sounds that carry through seawater across many miles. More relevant to the shark's detection system, orcas use echolocation. They produce rapid clicking sounds, listen for the echoes bouncing back off objects around them, and use those echoes to build a precise picture of their environment. The echolocation clicks of a hunting orca pod are intense, highly directional, and detectable at long range by any sensory system sensitive to vibration in water. Sharks are known to be sensitive to low-frequency vibrations and irregular pressure pulses. Whether the shark's lateral line is specifically sensitive to the frequency ranges of orca echolocation is an area researchers are still working through. But the basic physics supports the idea. Orca clicking produces pressure waves, Those waves travel through water. The shark's lateral line detects pressure waves. If the shark's sensory cells are calibrated to register orca frequency signals as threat indicators, the system works as a long-range warning device. The hearing anatomy of sharks adds another layer to this. Sharks have internal ears, two fluid-filled chambers inside the skull that detect both sound and acceleration. These inner ears are particularly sensitive to low-frequency sounds and infrasound, frequencies below the range of human hearing. Whether orca vocalizations fall into ranges the shark's inner ear is specifically tuned to detect is another open question, but the anatomical capability to receive low-frequency acoustic information from a distance is present in the shark. What makes this discussion significant is the combination of sensory systems potentially involved. The shark may be running chemical information through its nose, vibration data through its lateral line, and low-frequency acoustic data through its inner ears, all at the same time, all pointing toward the same threat from the same direction. Any one of those channels alone might be enough to trigger an avoidance response. All three together would create an overwhelming signal. Scientists who study predator detection note that animals living under high-stakes predation pressure tend to evolve multi-channel sensory warning systems precisely because relying on a single channel creates gaps. The great white shark has multiple independent ways to detect threats. The fact that all of them may be capable of registering orca presence from a distance explains how the departure response can begin so early and so decisively. What remains genuinely unknown is whether the shark recognizes the orca as a specific threat, or whether it reads the sensory signals from an orca as generically dangerous. The difference matters. A shark that has learned to associate a specific acoustic signature with danger will respond differently to a familiar threat than a shark encountering that signature for the first time. And that learning question connects directly to something even stranger. What the sharks do when the sensory alarm fires and there is nowhere to run except straight down into total darkness. The shark points its nose straight down and disappears. When an orca pod closes in and the surface offers no escape, great white sharks make a move that researchers did not expect the first time they saw it in the tag data. They dive. Straight down. Fast. And they go far deeper than any great white had been previously thought to travel during normal hunting behavior. Tag data from sharks fleeing orca encounters recorded descent profiles that reached nearly 4,000 feet below the surface. To picture that distance, stack the Empire State Building on top of itself almost 3 times. The shark is diving to the bottom of that imaginary tower, in complete darkness, under pressure that would crush a human being instantly, at a speed the tag records as nearly vertical. 4,000 feet down, sunlight is completely gone. The water temperature drops to just above freezing. The pressure at that depth reaches close to 180 times the pressure at the surface. The ocean down there is not a place most people associate with a coastal predator that hunts seals in shallow water. But the sharks go there, and they go there specifically when orcas are above them. The logic of the dive is straightforward. Orcas are air-breathing mammals. They cannot dive indefinitely. While killer whales are capable deep divers and have been recorded reaching depths of several hundred feet, sustaining pursuit at extreme depth is costly in oxygen and energy. A shark that dives faster and deeper than the pursuing whale can follow has effectively escaped into a part of the ocean the orca cannot comfortably operate in for long. The dive is a one-way ticket to safety as long as the shark can handle the conditions down there. Great whites are not typically classified as deep ocean animals. Their usual hunting zone runs from the surface down to a few hundred feet at most. The dives recorded during orca encounters push them several times beyond their normal operating depth, into a zone where almost everything about the environment is different. The tag data reveals something interesting about how the sharks behave once they reach extreme depth. They do not immediately turn and surface again. They hold depth, sometimes for extended periods, before making a slow, gradual ascent. The gradual return is physiologically important. A too rapid ascent from extreme depth can cause pressure-related injury in some animals. The sharks appear to manage their return carefully, suggesting some level of physiological awareness about depth transitions. What drives the shark to those depths, and what physiological mechanisms allow it to survive there, remained a subject of active research once the tag data made the behaviour undeniable. The shark's large, oil-rich liver turns out to play a role here as well. Squalene, the oil that fills the liver, is lighter than water and adjusts the shark's buoyancy as it descends. The liver essentially functions as a pressure-adjustable float, helping the shark maintain neutral buoyancy at different depths without constant swimming effort. The same liver the orca targets as a food source is the organ that makes the shark's escape dive physiologically possible. The orca's primary target is the key to the shark's deepest defence. That connection is striking. But the 4,000-foot escape is only possible when the shark detects the threat early enough to reach depth before contact. When the detection comes too late and the escape route downward is cut off, the shark runs out of options fast. And the world the shark enters at those depths, even when the escape works, is strange enough to deserve attention on its own. 4,000 feet down, the ocean is a different planet. No sunlight reaches this zone. The water sits just above freezing. The pressure is enough to collapse a car into a flat sheet of metal. And yet, this part of the ocean is full of life. Strange life. Life that operates on rules completely different from anything near the surface. The zone a fleeing great white shark drops into belongs to a community of creatures built for permanent darkness and crushing pressure. Lanternfish drift in enormous schools, their bodies lined with rows of small light-producing organs that glow in patterns scientists believe help the fish recognize each other in the dark. Viperfish hang motionless in the water column with teeth so long they cannot fully close their mouths, waiting for anything that brushes against them. Giant squid patrol these depths, carrying eyes the size of dinner plates built to detect the faint bioluminescence of prey moving nearby. The great white shark arriving at 4,000 feet is the surface world crashing into the deep world. It is a warm-bodied, fast-moving, visually oriented predator dropping suddenly into an environment where warmth is unusual. Stillness is the hunting strategy, and vision is almost useless. The shark's senses, which are highly effective in its normal coastal hunting range, face a radically different input environment here. In total darkness, the shark's sense of smell and its lateral line pressure detection become the dominant sensory tools. Vision, which plays a significant role in a great white's final attack phase near the surface, becomes nearly irrelevant at depth. The shark is not blind, but its visual system is built for filtered coastal light, not absolute blackness. At 4,000 feet, it is essentially navigating by smell and pressure sensation alone. The creatures of the deep zone have evolved over millions of years to exploit every energy source available in an environment where food is scarce and metabolisms run slow. A great white shark descending into that zone is, from the perspective of some deep-sea predators, an enormous and unexpected food source entering from above. The shark is far larger than anything that normally lives at that depth, which likely protects it from most threats down there. But the environment itself is the challenge. Cold water affects the shark's muscle performance directly. Great whites are partially warm-blooded through a system that keeps their core muscles and brain warmer than the surrounding water. This system costs energy and has limits. At sustained extreme depth in near-freezing water, the shark's muscle efficiency drops and its energy expenditure rises. The escape dive is not free. It costs the shark significantly more energy than surface swimming. The fact that sharks consistently choose this cost over the alternative says everything about how seriously they assess the orca threat. A 4,000-foot dive into freezing darkness, at enormous energy cost, into an environment full of strange and alien creatures, is preferable to staying near the surface where the orcas are. The shark's risk calculator produces the same answer every time, but the deep ocean does not just serve as an escape hatch for great whites. For the creatures that actually live there permanently, the arrival of a massive surface predator is an unusual event. Researchers have wondered whether great whites, during their extended deep stays following orca encounters, encounter anything at those depths capable of threatening them? The honest answer is that nobody knows for certain. That part of the ocean is still largely unexplored, and what happens to a great white shark at 4,000 feet remains mostly outside the range of current monitoring technology. What scientists do know is that the sharks come back up, and when they do, they come back to an ocean where the orcas did not just threaten individual adults. They went after the next generation. The most dangerous thing about an orca is what it remembers. Killer whales live long lives. Females regularly reach 60 years old, and some are believed to live past 80. Males live shorter lives but still reach their 40s and 50s in many cases. Over those decades, an orca accumulates an enormous amount of learned behaviour. Hunting techniques, migration routes, prey locations, social rules, all of it stored and available for use throughout the animal's life. What makes this dangerous for sharks specifically is that orcas do not keep their knowledge to themselves. They teach it. Researchers studying orca behaviour have documented what scientists call cultural transmission, the passing of learned behaviours between individuals through observation and practice rather than genetics. A calf born into a pod does not arrive knowing how to hunt. It watches its mother and the older members of its group. It follows along on hunts, observing the sequence of behaviours that lead to a successful kill. Over months and years, the calf practices the behaviours it has watched, gradually refining its own version of the technique until it can execute independently. The implication for sharks is severe. Every time an orca pod successfully hunts a great white, every calf watching that hunt takes one more step toward being able to replicate it independently. The technique for exploiting tonic immobility, locating the liver, making the precise extraction wound, and holding the shark upside down for the right duration. All of these steps are observable behaviours that a calf can learn from repeated exposure. Scientists observed a particularly clear example of this generational teaching in shark nursery zones. Researchers watching drone footage of attacks on juvenile great whites documented adult orcas completing the hunt while younger members of the pod remained nearby, close enough to observe the full sequence but not directly involved in the physical attack. After the adults finished, the younger orcas were observed interacting with the remains of the shark, appearing to examine the carcass and the wound site. This behaviour matches what researchers call demonstration learning. The adult performs. The younger animal watches, approaches, and investigates the result. Over repeated exposures, the young animal begins attempting the behaviours it has observed. The technique transfers from one generation to the next without any genetic change required. For the orca population, this means the hunting capability compounds over time. Each generation that successfully hunts great whites produces the next generation already primed to do the same. The knowledge base grows. The technique may refine. Variations discovered by one pod member may spread to others through observation. For the shark population, this means the threat does not diminish with time. An orca pod that develops a shark hunting technique does not take that technique to the grave. It seeds the next generation with it before the elder animals die. The pressure on sharks from this one learned behaviour can persist across orca generations, potentially for decades or longer. The cultural transmission of shark hunting knowledge also means that the behaviour can spread beyond the original pod. Orcas from different groups interact at times, and researchers have documented the spread of novel behaviours between pods over time. A technique that started with one pod in one location has the potential to eventually appear in pods that never had direct contact with the original teachers. What the younger orcas were watching in those nursery attacks was specifically the killing of young sharks. And that target selection, the deliberate choice to hunt juvenile great whites, carries consequences far larger than any single attack. A shark nursery is supposed to be the safest place in the ocean for a young great white. Nursery zones are specific areas, typically shallow coastal waters, where juvenile great white sharks spend their early years. The water in these zones is warm enough to support the shark's development, rich enough in smaller prey to feed a young animal that cannot yet tackle large marine mammals, and historically removed from the paths of the large predators that dominate open ocean. Young sharks grow up here before eventually maturing and moving into the deeper hunting ranges of adult great whites. For most of the shark's evolutionary history, nothing in a nursery zone threatened it significantly. Adult great whites do not cannibalize juveniles in these zones in the systematic way that some other shark species do. The main dangers are disease, injury, starvation, and the occasional larger shark of a different species. The nursery model worked because the threats it protected against were manageable. Orcas changed that calculation. Researchers equipped with drones began documenting something that had not previously been recorded. Orcapods entering the shallow waters of known great white nursery zones and hunting the juvenile sharks inside them. The hunting technique was the same one used on adults: the approach, the ram, the flip, the immobilization, the liver extraction, but applied to animals a fraction of the size of a full-grown great white. A juvenile great white does not have the mass or muscle strength of an adult. It cannot dive 4,000 feet to escape. It cannot generate the kind of lateral acceleration that might let it slip out of an encirclement. A young shark in shallow nursery water, surrounded by an orcapod that has specifically navigated into that zone, has almost no options. The drones captured sequences where orcas moved through a nursery area methodically. The pod did not simply chase whichever juvenile shark came nearest. The movements appeared targeted, with the pod coordinating to separate individuals from any group clustering and cut off escape angles before making contact. The young sharks that managed to detect the threat early fled into shallower water or toward rocky areas where the larger orca bodies could not follow easily. Many did not get that opportunity. Juvenile great whites that survive nursery zones grow up to become the adult apex predators that regulate coastal ecosystems. Remove enough of them before they reach adulthood, and the adult population begins to thin over the following years, with no visible immediate cause at the surface level of the ecosystem. The impact is delayed by the time it takes a great white to mature, which is somewhere around 15 years. This delayed impact makes nursery attacks particularly difficult to assess in real time. A researcher watching an orcapod hunt juvenile sharks in a nursery zone today is watching a consequence that will not appear fully in adult shark population data for a decade and a half. By the time the effect shows up clearly, the attacks that caused it are years in the past. Scientists observing nursery attacks in 2025 documented multiple events over a single season. The orcas returned to the same nursery areas repeatedly across different weeks. The consistency of the return visits suggests the pods had identified specific nursery zones as reliable hunting sites and incorporated them into regular movement patterns. The young sharks being targeted today represent the adult population of the future, and what the orcas are doing to that future population becomes even more significant when you consider the current state of shark numbers globally and how little it takes to tip a slow reproducing species towards serious decline. The threat to the nursery is the threat to the species, and it is just getting started. Great white sharks reproduce slowly. That is the detail that makes nursery attacks more than just a predator-prey story. A female great white reaches sexual maturity at around 33 years old. She carries pups for an estimated 12 months before giving birth. Her litter typically contains between 2 and 10 pups. She does not give birth every year. The interval between litters may be 2 to 3 years. Over her entire life, a single female great white produces a relatively small number of offspring compared to most fish species. Compare that to a species like the Atlantic bluefin tuna, which can release millions of eggs in a single spawning event. Or even to smaller sharks, some of which reproduce annually with larger litters. Great whites are built for longevity and individual survival, not high reproductive output. Their population can sustain normal levels of adult mortality because the long lifespan of each individual compensates for the slow birth rate. What the population cannot easily absorb is elevated juvenile mortality, when young sharks are being killed in nursery zones before they reach maturity. They are being removed before they contribute anything to the reproductive future of the species. Each juvenile killed in a nursery is a potential adult that never grows up, a potential mother or father that never produces offspring. Multiply that across multiple nursery attacks over multiple seasons, and the numbers begin to compound against the population in a way that takes years to become visible. Fisheries biologists use a concept called recruitment to describe the rate at which juveniles survive long enough to join the adult breeding population. A species with healthy recruitment replaces its adults at a rate that keeps the population stable. A species with suppressed recruitment produces fewer adults each generation than the previous one. The decline is gradual and hard to detect early, but once it accelerates, reversing it is extremely difficult. Great white sharks are already listed as a vulnerable species globally. Their numbers have declined significantly over the past several decades due to fishing pressure, bycatch, and habitat change. The population is not in a position to absorb additional sustained pressure on juvenile survival without consequence. The orca attacks on nurseries represent exactly that kind of additional pressure. They are new in the scientific record, meaning researchers do not yet have long-term data on how significantly they are suppressing recruitment. The 2025 observations documented repeated attacks, but the full scope of how many nursery zones orcas are currently visiting and how frequently those visits are happening is still being mapped. There is a further complication. Orca populations have been growing in some regions where great white populations have been declining. More orcas in an area with fewer sharks means each individual shark faces higher encounter probability. The ratio shifts against the shark as the two trends continue moving in opposite directions. For the ocean ecosystem as a whole, a sustained decline in great white shark populations carries the same kinds of cascading effects seen in the Farallon Islands data, but at a much larger scale and without the natural reset that occurs when sharks return after a year-long evacuation. Permanent reduction in shark numbers means permanent release of the prey populations they control, restructuring food webs along entire coastlines rather than just at a single island. The nursery attacks are the mechanism that could drive that permanent reduction, and the footage that first made these attacks undeniable came not from a research vessel or a tagged animal, but from a camera flying above the water in 2022. The Neptune Islands sit roughly 40 miles off the coast of South Australia. For great white sharks, they are one of the most important sites on Earth, a congregation point where large adults gather seasonally, drawn by the presence of Australian sea lions that breed on the rocky shores. For researchers who study great whites, the Neptune Islands are a gift. Predictable shark presence, accessible by boat, and shallow enough around the islands for surface observation. Cage diving operations work here, research teams deploy equipment here, and in 2015, a witnessed attack here added a new piece to the understanding of how orcas actually control a shark during the immobilization phase. A team on the water observed an orca interacting with a large great white shark near the surface. What distinguished this event from the 1997 Farallon attack was the duration of the surface contact. The orca held the shark at the surface for an extended period. The shark was visible throughout, floating motionless and inverted, with the orca maintaining position alongside it. The extended duration allowed observers to confirm something about tonic immobility that was previously known from laboratory studies but had not been directly verified in a wild orca-shark interaction. The shark remained completely paralyzed for as long as the orca maintained the inverted position. The immobility was not intermittent, it was total and sustained for the entire duration of the orca's contact. Researchers watching the event noted that the orca appeared calm throughout. There was no frantic movement, no visible struggle from the shark, no defensive response from the shark's tail or jaws. The orca had full control of the situation from the moment the inversion was achieved. The shark's body floated limply alongside the much larger animal. The Neptune Islands event also documented something about how a lone orca or a small group manages a large shark without the full pod encirclement seen in California. The orca used its own body mass to maintain the shark's inverted position, holding contact along the shark's body to prevent it from rolling back upright. The technique was physical and sustained, requiring the orca to remain engaged rather than simply initiating the inversion and stepping back. For the scientists watching, the Neptune Islands attack provided direct, witnessed confirmation of the full behavioural sequence. The California data had been built largely from tag records and inference. The South African events had been reconstructed from carcass evidence. The Neptune Islands event was happening at the surface in daylight with researchers present, close enough to observe body positioning and behaviour in real time. Accounts from that observation described the shark as appearing physically undamaged during the surface phase, consistent with the Tonic immobility model where the shark's paralysis is neurological rather than the result of injury. The shark was not dead before the extraction began, it was alive and paralysed. That distinction matters for understanding the efficiency of the orca's technique. A dead shark begins decomposing immediately and the liver degrades in quality quickly. A living, paralysed shark has a liver in optimal condition throughout the extraction process. The orca's method of using tonic immobility rather than killing the shark outright may be partly about preserving the nutritional quality of the target organ. The Neptune Islands provided witnessed evidence, but the Neptune Islands were witnessed by people present on the water. What came 7 years later required no boat, no researcher on site, and produced footage clearer than anything a surface observer could capture from a vessel. For decades, everything scientists knew about orca attacks on great white sharks came from 3 sources: electronic tag data, carcass examination, and eyewitness accounts from people who happened to be on the water during an event. Each source was valuable. Each had significant gaps. Tag data showed movement and depth but no visuals. Carcass evidence showed the result but not the process. Eyewitness accounts captured moments but depended on the observer's position and viewing angle. Nobody had ever captured the full aerial perspective of a live attack from above, the view that would show the body positioning, the coordination between animals, and the sequence of contact in one continuous image. In 2022, drone technology provided it. Researchers operating drones above waters off the California coast captured the first confirmed aerial footage of a killer whale actively hunting a great white shark. The footage showed the orca approaching the shark from below, making contact, and the shark responding by attempting to change direction. The drone maintained position above the interaction, capturing the body sizes, movement speeds, and relative positioning of both animals simultaneously. The aerial perspective revealed something that surface observation could not. From directly above, the coordination of body angle during the approach was visible in a way it had never been before. The orca's approach vector, the angle at which it came at the shark, and the precise point on the shark's body where contact was aimed. All of this was readable from the drone footage in a way that added specific detail to what had previously been inferred from behaviour models. The footage also showed the shark's response in full. The directional change the shark attempted after detecting the orca, the speed of that change, and the orca's adjustment to match it. From above, the interaction looked less like a predator pursuing prey and more like 2 pieces in a chess game where one had significantly more options than the other. For the scientific community, the 2022 footage was significant beyond what it showed about the specific attack. It demonstrated that drone technology could now observe these interactions with enough resolution and stability to generate scientifically useful data. Prior to this, drone cameras had not been positioned correctly, or stable enough, or present at an event in time to capture a complete interaction sequence. Drone monitoring of orca-shark interactions has expanded since then. Researchers operating in regions where both species are present have begun deploying drones as a standard monitoring tool, keeping them above areas where orca pods are active and hoping to capture interactions as they occur. The footage database that has accumulated since 2022 provides a growing visual record of behaviours that previously existed only in data form. The aerial view also provided something valuable for public understanding of the interaction. written descriptions of body size differences and movement coordination are difficult to fully picture. Seeing an orca and a great white side by side from directly above, with no other visual reference needed, makes the size differential immediate and undeniable. The footage spread widely when released, bringing the scientific story to an audience that had not previously followed the research. What the drone footage could not answer was a question that researchers had been circling for years. The attacks documented near California, near South Africa, near Australia, all targeted great white sharks specifically. But the same waters held other large shark species. Why great whites? Why not other sharks in the area that might be similarly sized or similarly calorie-rich? The answer to that question turns out to be specific, practical, and rooted in one anatomical fact about the great white that makes it uniquely valuable as a target. Not every large shark in the ocean ends up on an orca's menu. Waters where great white shark and orca interactions are documented also contain other large shark species. Bull sharks, tiger sharks, short-fin mako sharks, and blue sharks all share overlapping ranges with both great whites and killer whales in various regions. Some of these species are formidable predators in their own right. Some reach impressive sizes. And yet the documented evidence of orcas specifically and repeatedly targeting great white sharks, rather than these other species, points to a deliberate preference. The leading explanation comes down to the liver. Different shark species have different liver sizes and compositions. The great white shark's liver is exceptional even among sharks. It is proportionally enormous relative to body size, filling most of the shark's body cavity and making up a higher percentage of the animal's total weight than the liver of most other shark species. The squalene content of great white shark liver oil is also particularly high, making it one of the most energy-dense biological materials in the ocean. A bull shark's liver, while present, is proportionally smaller and less energy-dense than a great white's. The same is true for tiger sharks and most other large species. For an orca evaluating the caloric return on the effort required to hunt a specific target, the great white shark's liver represents a significantly better return than other available options. There is a second factor. The great white shark's behaviour during the immobilization phase may be more reliable than other species. Tonic immobility is known in several shark species, but appears particularly consistent and complete in great whites. If orcas have learned that great whites enter full, sustained paralysis when inverted, while other species may struggle more or recover faster, the great white becomes the preferred target, partly because the extraction process is safer and more predictable with them than with alternatives. A third factor involves habituation. Orca pods that have developed a great white hunting technique through repeated practice have optimized for that specific target. The approach angle, the flipping method, the extraction site, all tuned through repetition to the great white's specific body proportions and behavior. Switching to a different shark species would require recalibrating a technique that already works efficiently. Pods that hunt great whites continue to hunt great whites because that is what they have practiced. The selective pressure this creates on great white populations is greater than it would be if orcas were indiscriminate large shark predators. If orcas hunted all large sharks equally, the impact would be spread across multiple species. Because the preference appears to concentrate on great whites, the full weight of orca predation pressure falls on a single species that is already under significant stress from other sources. Researchers studying orca diet across different geographic regions note that the preference for great whites is particularly pronounced in the populations where the liver extraction technique is well established. In regions where orcas do not appear to have developed this technique, great white predation by orcas is less documented. The technique and the preference appear to be linked. The pods that know how to extract the liver prefer the species with the best liver. The great white shark's most valuable internal asset, the organ that keeps it buoyant, fueled, and capable of deep escape dives, is precisely the thing that makes it the orca's most preferred target. The liver is simultaneously the shark's greatest survival tool and its greatest vulnerability, and it sits inside a body where its exact location has been learned by an animal intelligent enough to teach that location to its children. Most people picture a shark and think of the teeth. Scientists picture the inside. A great white shark's liver is hard to describe without a comparison that sounds made up. In a large adult great white, the liver can account for roughly a third of the animal's total body weight. For a shark weighing 3,000 pounds, that is a liver approaching 1,000 pounds. An organ weighing more than most adult horses, contained inside a single fish. The liver runs the full length of the shark's body cavity, from just behind the skull to the point where the body cavity ends near the tail. It is not a compact, fist-sized organ like a human liver. It fills the space the way a water balloon fills a narrow container, conforming to the body cavity's shape and pressing against the internal walls on all sides. The two lobes of a great white liver are longer than most humans are tall. The organ serves functions in the shark that no equivalent structure performs in a land animal. Buoyancy control is the primary one. Bony fish use a swim bladder, a gas-filled sac that they inflate or deflate to rise and sink through the water column. Sharks do not have a swim bladder. Instead, the oil in the liver, being lighter than water, provides lift that partially counteracts the shark's natural tendency to sink. The shark adjusts its depth partly by changing how fast it swims, using its pectoral fins as diving planes, and partly by relying on the buoyancy provided by the massive oil-filled liver below it. The oil itself, primarily squalene, stores energy at a density significantly higher than muscle tissue. Muscle tissue is energy expensive to build and maintain, and the energy stored in it is not as immediately accessible as the energy stored in oil. The shark's liver functions as a fuel tank of extraordinary capacity, allowing the animal to go extended periods without feeding while still having energy reserves available for high output bursts when needed. This fuel tank capacity is part of what allows great white sharks to make long ocean crossings. Tagged sharks have been tracked crossing the Pacific Ocean from California to Hawaii and back. Those migrations take weeks of continuous swimming with limited feeding opportunity. The liver sustains those crossings. For an orca hunting in cold Pacific or Atlantic water, the caloric math is straightforward. Hunting is energetically expensive. Cold water requires constant energy expenditure to maintain body temperature. A food source that delivers concentrated calories in a single extraction without requiring the orca to process hundreds of pounds of muscle and bone is maximally efficient. The great white liver is the closest thing to a high-calorie meal replacement that exists in the open ocean. The 600-pound liver that washes ashore attached to a drifting carcass represents the portion the orcas did not want. They already took the part that mattered. What remains is the rest of the shark, intact, drifting toward whatever coastline the current carries it to. 5 of those carcasses on a South African beach. Drone footage from California. Tagged animals disappearing from sensors. The story keeps producing evidence from different directions, and one of the most striking pieces of evidence was something researchers could not see at all. They could only hear it. Killer whales are never silent, but during a hunt, the sounds they make change. Researchers who have recorded orca vocalizations across decades of fieldwork describe a consistent pattern. Orca pods make noise constantly when travelling and socialising. Whistles, calls, and the burst pulse sounds that carry over long distances fill the water around an active pod. Each pod has its own vocal repertoire, a set of calls that members recognise as belonging to their group. Young orcas learn these calls in infancy and use them throughout their lives. When a hunt begins, the acoustic pattern shifts. Researchers analysing recordings made during documented hunting events noted that pods became quieter or switched to a different class of sounds in the period leading up to and during the attack phase. Echolocation clicks, which are high frequency and directional, replaced the broader social calls. The pod shifted from broadcasting its presence widely to using a precise targeted sound system that served navigation and coordination rather than social bonding. Echolocation in orcas works by producing a rapid burst of clicks from an organ in the forehead called the melon. These clicks travel forward through the water, bounce off objects in the environment, and return to the whale as echoes. The orca's brain processes those echoes into a three-dimensional picture of the space ahead. The system is precise enough to detect the size, shape, distance, and movement of objects in complete darkness. During a shark hunt, echolocation allows each orca in the pod to maintain awareness of the shark's exact position even when visual contact is limited by murky water, darkness, or angle. The clicking is continuous during the approach, giving the hunting orca a real-time update on the shark's movement every fraction of a second. The sound the clicks make to a human underwater has been described as resembling a very fast typewriter or a burst of static. To an orca, those clicks are a high-resolution visual field, as detailed and reliable as what humans see with their eyes in daylight. Researchers believe the shift to quieter, click-heavy communication during hunts may serve two purposes simultaneously. The echolocation provides navigation data for the hunting orcas. The reduction in loud social calls may reduce the acoustic warning available to the shark. If the shark detects orca presence partly through the pressure waves of orca vocalizations, a hunting pod that switches to the shorter range, directional frequency of echolocation may be harder to detect at long range than a socializing pod broadcasting widely. The communication that coordinates the actual encirclement appears to involve a different category of sounds, pulsed calls that researchers describe as rapid repetitions of a specific pattern. These calls change in frequency and rhythm during the active phases of a hunt. Scientists analysing them speculate they may function as positional updates between pod members, something analogous to a team calling out positions during a play. After the hunt ends, the acoustic pattern shifts again. Longer, more complex calls return. The pod's vocalization rate increases. Some researchers interpret the post-hunt vocal burst as a social response to a shared successful event, something in the behaviour that resembles what humans might recognise as celebration. Though applying that word to animal behaviour requires caution, the acoustic complexity of the orca hunt reflects the cognitive complexity behind it. Sound is how the plan runs in real time. What is becoming increasingly clear is that climate change may be rewriting where those sounds are heard and which sharks end up hearing them. The ocean is warming, and as it warms, the maps that great white sharks and killer whales have followed for generations are being redrawn. Great white sharks are highly sensitive to water temperature. They prefer specific temperature ranges for hunting, typically between 50 and 70 degrees Fahrenheit. Their nursery zones, the shallow coastal waters where juveniles develop, exist in areas where these temperatures hold reliably across seasons. Their migration routes follow temperature gradients, moving north or south with the season to stay within their preferred range. As ocean surface temperatures rise, those temperature gradients are shifting. Water that used to be too cold for comfortable great white habitat is warming into the acceptable range further north and south of the equator. Sharks are following the warmth, appearing in waters they rarely used historically, and spending more time in regions that were previously outside their core range. Orca migration routes follow a different set of cues. Killer whales track prey populations, moving to wherever food concentrates seasonally. Historically, great white nursery zones and major orca migration corridors occupied different geographic spaces often enough that direct encounters, while they occurred, were not a daily feature of either species' life. As temperature shifts push shark nursery zones into new locations, some of those locations overlap with orca migration paths that have been established for decades. The sharks arrive in a zone that is new to them, and find themselves crossing a path that orcas already know well and travel regularly. The encounter probability goes up sharply in these newly overlapping zones. Scientists studying this pattern note that it creates a compounding problem for sharks. Moving into new habitat means moving away from the areas where sharks have built up generational knowledge of escape routes, prey locations, and safe zones. A juvenile shark in a new nursery area does not have the benefit of generations of local behavioural adaptation. It is in unfamiliar water, facing a predator that knows that water far better. Drone monitoring and tagging studies conducted in the early 2020s began identifying nursery zones that had not been recorded in historical data located in areas where ocean temperatures have risen enough in recent decades to make them habitable for young sharks. Cross-referencing those new nursery locations with orca movement data revealed several cases of newly established nurseries sitting inside or adjacent to known orca migration corridors. The timing of shark nursery use and orca migration does not always align, meaning not every overlap results in immediate attacks. But as both the number of new nursery locations and the frequency of orca visits to those locations increase, the statistical likelihood of repeated attacks on new nursery zones rises consistently. For scientists modelling future shark population dynamics, climate change adds a variable to the orca-shark relationship that makes long-term population projections significantly more uncertain. The historical baseline of how often orcas and juvenile sharks encountered each other is being replaced by a new baseline that nobody has direct data for yet. The models are running on assumptions that the shifting temperature maps are already making outdated. The ocean is becoming a different place, and the consequences of that change reach far beyond the animals themselves, touching fishing fleets, coastal communities, tourism economies, and every human system that depends on a stable ocean environment. The orca and the shark are indicators of something much larger, and what happens between them in the coming decades will tell researchers a great deal about what the warming ocean is becoming. When the shark leaves, the ocean does not just change for the animals in it. Coastal communities along the California coast, the Western Cape of South Africa, and the waters around Australia's Neptune Islands have built significant parts of their local economies around predictable great white shark presence. Cage diving, shark tourism, research operations, and the general draw of coastal wildlife watching all depend on being able to tell visitors that sharks will be there. When orca encounters drive sharks away for months or longer, that economic infrastructure faces a gap it was not designed to handle. Cage diving operators along the South African Western Cape reported sharp drops in shark sightings following the period when port and starboard's attacks pushed great whites out of established ranges. Tour companies that had run reliable shark encounters for years suddenly faced seasons where the animals simply were not present at sites where they had always been before. The business impact was direct and immediate. The effect on commercial fishing is more complex. Great white sharks do not target commercially fished species heavily in most regions, but their presence shapes the behaviour of the species that do. The Trophic cascade effect documented at the Farallon Islands, where shark absence causes seal populations to grow sharply, extends to fish populations below the seals. More seals eating more fish in a specific coastal zone means less fish available in that zone for everything else, including fishing operations that work those same waters. Beach safety programs in Australia and South Africa use shark monitoring data to manage coastal swimming and surfing areas. These programs rely on understanding where great whites are and where they are not at any given time. When orca encounters shift shark distributions rapidly and unpredictably, the monitoring systems built around historical shark location data become less reliable. A beach declared safe based on recent shark surveys may be receiving a displaced shark population within hours if an orca pod moves through the area. Scientific research programs that depend on consistent great white presence at established study sites face a different kind of disruption. Long-term research projects tracking individual sharks over years lose continuity when the sharks evacuate. Equipment placed at study sites to collect data becomes less useful if the animals it was designed to monitor have left. Research timelines extend. Data gaps appear. The social dimension of the shift also carries weight. In coastal towns where shark tourism drives significant seasonal income, the absence of sharks does not just reduce revenue. It raises community questions about the long-term reliability of the local ecosystem that the economy was built around. If the sharks are less predictable year to year, the businesses that serve visitors who come specifically to see them face a structural uncertainty that is difficult to plan around. None of these consequences are simple to address. The orca-shark dynamic is a natural ecological process. The predator relationship between the two species predates any human economy built around either animal. Human systems that assumed shark distribution would remain stable have discovered that the assumption was incorrect, and the correction required is substantial. The Pacific coast differs meaningfully from the Atlantic in how these pressures have played out. An understanding that geographic difference reveals something important about where the greatest future stress on shark populations is likely to come from. Not every ocean carries the same story. Documented orca attacks on great white sharks concentrate heavily along specific coastlines: the northern California coast around the Farallon Islands, the western Cape of South Africa, and the waters around southern Australia's Neptune Islands. These locations share common characteristics. They are areas where great white sharks concentrate reliably, where orca pods pass through or reside seasonally, and where the combination of prey availability and water temperature brings both species into the same geographic space repeatedly. Atlantic waters have produced far fewer documented interactions of this kind. Great white sharks exist in the Atlantic and are regularly sighted and tagged along the eastern United States coast, particularly around Cape Cod, and along the coasts of Portugal and the Mediterranean. Orca populations also exist in the Atlantic. But the density of documented attacks and the severity of evacuation responses observed in the Pacific and around South Africa have not appeared with the same frequency in Atlantic data. Researchers offer several explanations for this difference. First, the prey concentrations that draw great whites to specific Pacific and South African sites are particularly dense. The Farallon Islands sea lion and elephant seal colonies, the seal populations around the Cape, and the Australian sea lion colonies at the Neptune Islands all create exceptionally high shark density at specific locations. Orcas navigating areas with that density of sharks have more hunting opportunities per unit of territory than orcas in areas where sharks are more spread out. Second, the orca populations in the Pacific and around South Africa that have developed shark hunting techniques represent specific cultural groups within the broader orca species. Not all orca populations hunt great whites. The behaviour is present in specific pods and specific lineages that have developed and maintained the technique through cultural transmission. Atlantic orca populations may not include pods that have developed this particular hunting strategy at the same level of refinement. Third, the research infrastructure along Pacific and South African sites is significantly more developed for great white monitoring than in most Atlantic locations. More tags in the water, more researchers watching, and more established monitoring programs mean that events which occur in the Pacific get detected, recorded, and published more reliably than events in less monitored Atlantic waters. Some researchers caution that the apparent rarity of Atlantic interactions may partly reflect differences in monitoring intensity rather than true differences in interaction frequency. What is consistent across all documented locations is the behavioural response. Regardless of geography, when a great white shark confirms orca presence, the departure follows the same pattern: fast, directional, and sustained. The fear response appears to be universal in the species. The variation lies in how often and where the trigger encounters occur. The Pacific concentration of documented events makes it the primary lens through which researchers understand this dynamic, and because Pacific monitoring data is the most complete. It is also the source of the best information about what great white sharks actually do in the months after an evacuation, not just where they go, but how they return. The shark leaves fast. Where it goes next is more complicated. Electronic tag data from sharks that evacuated established feeding sites following orca encounters shows a consistent initial phase, rapid, directional movement away from the site at close to maximum sustainable swimming speed. The sharks do not follow coastlines or established migration routes during this initial phase. They move away from the threat vector first and sort out geography second. In the hours following departure, the tags show the shark settling into a directional heading rather than continuing random flight. The sharks begin moving toward alternative areas they have used previously, locations held in their spatial memory from past seasons. great white sharks maintain detailed mental maps of the ocean geography around their home ranges. These maps include feeding sites, migration corridors, resting zones, and depth profiles. After an orca encounter drives them from a primary site, the sharks navigate toward known secondary locations using this stored spatial information. Researchers analysing the tag tracks noted that sharks evacuating from the Farallon Islands did not simply scatter in random directions. The departing animals moved towards specific alternate zones along the California coast and offshore banks where great whites had been previously documented. The evacuation was not panic without direction. It was a rapid reorientation from a primary site to a known backup location. In the weeks following the initial departure, the tag data shows the sharks establishing a modified routine at these alternate locations. Feeding activity resumes, though the data suggests it takes time for the sharks to settle into the same kind of consistent behavioural pattern they maintained at their primary sites. The alternate locations may not offer the same prey concentration as the primary site, meaning the sharks are accepting a lower quality feeding environment in exchange for reduced exposure to the orca threat. At some point during the absence period, some sharks make exploratory approaches toward their former primary sites. These approaches are documented in the tag data as a movement toward the site followed by a retreat before the shark reaches its former territory. The shark comes close, reads the environment and turns back. Researchers interpret these events as the shark testing whether the perceived threat is still associated with the location. The landscape of fear response appears to allow periodic testing rather than permanent avoidance. Eventually, after the absence period extends long enough that the threat association fades, the shark completes the return. The final approach to the primary site after a year-long absence tends to happen gradually, with the shark spending time at the edges of its former range before moving back into the central hunting zones. What the tag data cannot fully reveal is what the shark experiences during those exploratory approaches and retreats. The animal is clearly processing environmental information and making decisions based on it. Whether any emotional analogue to caution or reluctance is part of that processing is a question animal behaviour scientists debate, but the behavioural output, repeated approach-retreat sequences before a final return, suggests a decision process more complex than simple instinct. The return, when it finally completes, reconnects the shark to an ecosystem that has spent a year reorganising in its absence. The seals have grown bolder, the population has swelled. The shark that returns is stepping back into a territory that has drifted significantly from the state it left. And the shark that returns may itself be slightly different. The question researchers are beginning to ask is whether those changes compound over generations. The shark has been on Earth for millions of years. It has survived things that killed almost everything else. So the question researchers are starting to ask is whether the great white is changing in response to orca pressure. Adaptation in the evolutionary sense takes generations. A behavioural trait or physical feature that helps an individual survive becomes more common in the population if individuals with that trait reproduce more successfully than those without it. Over many generations, the trait spreads. The timeline for this kind of change in great white sharks is long. They live for decades and reproduce slowly. Meaningful genetic shifts in a population of slow-reproducing animals take many generations to become detectable, but behavioural adaptation can happen faster. Individual animals can change their behaviours within a single lifetime based on experience, learning, and the consequences of past choices. And populations can shift their collective behaviour patterns within a generation if the pressure driving the change is strong and consistent enough. Researchers have noted some patterns in recent great white data that suggest behavioural shifts may be underway in populations experiencing repeated orca encounters. Sharks in heavily orca-affected areas show a tendency towards spending more time in deeper water than historical baselines recorded for the same geographic zones. The increased deep water dwelling is not dramatic enough to be called a migration to new habitat. It is a subtle depth preference shift, the sharks operating at the lower end of their comfortable depth range more often than they used to. Some researchers interpret this as a learned avoidance behaviour emerging at the population level. If individual sharks that stay deeper during orca active periods survive more successfully than those that remain in shallow coastal zones, and if shallow-dwelling sharks are being removed from the population at higher rates through orca predation, then over time the surviving population skews toward the behavioural profile of the deeper-dwelling animals. The population's average behaviour shifts without any genetic change required. There are early, cautious suggestions in some data that shark reaction times to orca signals may be faster in populations with longer histories of orca exposure compared to populations in regions where orca encounters are rare. A shark that has grown up in an environment where orca encounters are common may develop faster detection and response behaviours than one that has never encountered the threat before. Whether any of these observed shifts represent true adaptation or simply reflect the behaviour of the individual survivors remaining after orca pressure removed the more vulnerable animals is genuinely difficult to determine with current data. The two explanations would produce similar observable outcomes, and distinguishing between them requires data across more generations than researchers currently have available. What is clear is that the sharks experiencing this pressure are not passive. They change their movement patterns after encounters. They adjust their sight use. They modify their depth preferences in response to perceived threat levels. The individual animal is responding to its environment in real time. Whether that response is accumulating into something that persists across generations is the question that the next few decades of research will answer. The stakes of that answer are considerable. A shark population that adapts successfully to orca predation pressure is one that finds new equilibrium and stabilizes. A population that cannot adapt fast enough faces a different trajectory entirely. And that trajectory depends heavily on whether the pressure from orca attacks continues to increase, which depends on something neither species controls: the future of the ocean itself. Two of the ocean's most powerful animals are on trajectories that point in opposite directions. Orca populations in several key regions have been growing. The southern resident killer whales off the Pacific Northwest face pressure from reduced salmon availability, but other orca populations, including those documented hunting great whites off California and South Africa, have maintained or increased their numbers in recent decades. The cultural knowledge of shark hunting technique has been established in multiple pods and is actively being taught to new generations. Great white shark populations are moving the other way. Global assessments place the species as vulnerable to extinction. Decades of fishing pressure, accidental capture in nets set for other species, and direct killing in shark finning operations reduced shark numbers sharply through the latter half of the 20th century. Legal protections introduced in various countries beginning in the 1990s provided some relief, and some regional populations have shown partial recovery. But the recovery is happening into an environment that is more dangerous for sharks than the one they were removed from. The ocean is warmer. Nursery zones are shifting. And orca predation pressure, particularly on juveniles, is a new variable layered on top of existing threats that shark populations were already struggling to absorb. Scientists studying both species note that the two trajectories interact. As shark numbers decline in a region, orca food webs that include sharks face reduced availability of a high-value food source. Orcas are versatile hunters and would shift to other prey, but if shark numbers drop enough that orcapods relying on shark liver as a significant caloric contribution face genuine scarcity, the hunting behaviour itself may evolve in response. Conversely, if orca attacks on nurseries accelerate and great white recruitment drops significantly, the ecological consequences for coastal systems would be extensive and long-lasting. The cascades documented at the Farallon Islands operating at the scale of a single island and a single season would become permanent features of altered coastlines if the shark population declined broadly. Researchers are clear that predicting the future of two dynamic, intelligent, long-lived species in a rapidly changing ocean is genuinely difficult. The variables interact in ways that current models can only partially capture. What they can say is that the orca-shark relationship is not static, has never been static, and is currently in a period of particularly rapid change driven by forces that extend far beyond either animal. The fossil record shows great white sharks surviving 5 mass extinctions, including events that wiped out the majority of species on Earth. The species carries hundreds of millions of years of survival in its biology. It has outlasted catastrophes that reshaped the entire planet. Whether it can adapt quickly enough to a combination of human pressure, climate disruption, and escalating orca predation is a question the ocean is currently answering in real time. The orca and the shark will continue their relationship regardless of what humans do or do not do next. But the ocean those two animals inhabit is being reshaped by choices humans are making right now. The health of the ocean's apex predators is a direct measure of how those choices are landing. Watch the sharks. Watch the orcas. The story they are writing together is one of the clearest signals the ocean sends about the state of everything inside it. If you have made it this far, you already know this channel goes deep. Subscribe so you do not miss what comes next.